Good morning. Welcome, She. Thanks for joining me. Those are two really great questions I see already in chat. I'm going to start answering those very soon, but I just want to leave a couple minutes just in case we might have some latecomers. So, hello and welcome if you just arrived. I'm going to start answering some of the substantive questions pretty soon here, but feel free to start putting those questions in the chat. Yeah, those are all really great questions. I'm really excited to dive into those. Lots of great questions. Love it. Can't wait to start diving in. And I'll be glad to say more about in framing. So I guess maybe I'll start with in framing, because maybe I'll give a little bit of background with Heidegger's theory of truth, more generally speaking, and then how does it manifest itself in his theory of inframing. So maybe I'll start there. We'll start with the negative characterization of what you ought not do, what is supremely dangerous, and then we'll sort of work backwards to your questions about how do we avoid this technological attitude? How do we avoid this in framing? So yeah, I guess I'll just start there with talking a little bit about Heidegger's general theory of truth and how it relates to this concept of inframing or Gestell. Gestell in the German just literally means to place something somewhere or to set it somewhere. So inframing is also about limiting things, specifically revealing truths about something such that it can no longer be what it is and reveal itself for its own sake. Inframing is one way of revealing truths about things. Now, for Heidegger, revealing truth is always a dangerous thing. He has what we would call an aletheic, or a revealing or an unconcealing theory of truth. Right? The things in themselves are manifold. They are multifaceted. We never really see something fully and completely for what it is. So revealing truth is always dangerous, because whenever you reveal one truth about something, you're always covering up other truths implicitly. So you might think about this in terms of digging a hole, right? This is a revealing or an unconcealing theory of truth. So if you're digging a hole, if you're uncovering something, that dirt needs to go somewhere. So while you're uncovering one thing, you're always implicitly covering up something else. This is just the nature of revealing truth. Whenever we reveal truth, it's always according to our goals, our projects, our concerns. Now, there's nothing wrong with concern, care, and projects. This is how we create meaning for ourselves and for others, is by trying to creatively transform the meanings around us according to our own projects, our own goals, and our own meanings. So care, concern, our own interests is just how we reveal truths about things. So it's always going to be dangerous, because whenever you reveal one thing, you're always simultaneously covering up something else. Inframing, however, represents what Heidegger would call a supreme danger, because inframing is what happens when you reveal truth about something in a way that it can no longer reveal itself in a self-showing way. So in my unboxing video, I used the example of blowing up a mountain because you want to get at the ore that's inside the mountain. Now, if you blow up the mountain in order to mine ore that's there, you are revealing a truth about the mountain. You're revealing a truth that, namely, this mountain is standing reserve, or that it is a resource that exists merely for our own consumption. However, if we blow up the mountain, then there's no way that that mountain can ever reveal itself as it is for its own sake. It can never be itself again. So this is the supreme danger of inframing, is not just that we're covering up certain truths while exposing others, but that we are exposing certain truths such that no other truths about that entity can ever be revealed. So we might think about crude oil, right? One of the truths that we can reveal about crude oil is that it's a resource there for our use, right? That it can be turned into a commodity, that can be put into a market of exchange so that it can be switched about ever anew, right? In this process of commerce and commodification. Now, that is a truth about crude oil, is that it can be turned into energy for our consumption to be used for our goals and our purposes. But of course, think about it in an extreme case. Once we've tapped all of the crude oil that exists in the earth, that oil can never be what it is in itself for its own sake, right? We've revealed truth about it. This is a product that we can refine and turn into various petroleum products. But once we've used up all the oil, that oil can never be what it is for its own sake. Or you might also think about even how this relates to people, because this is part of the supreme danger for Heidegger, is that we reveal not only things in nature as being mere resource, but that we also think about ourselves that way. People in English say a lot of the times that time is money. Heidegger, I think, would find this deeply offensive because your time is not a commodity that you use to get money. Time is the very means by which you create meaning for yourselves and others. But if you're the kind of person who needs to work 90 hours a week just so that you can pay off your debts or support your family, then you can't really be anything else other than a worker, right? And especially if you get sick from working so hard, or, right, I don't know, like if for some reason your mental or physical health is harmed by your work, well, then yes, you've been revealed to be a worker. You've been revealed to be somebody whose time is worth money, but you can never be anything else. So that's that supreme danger of inframing. So let me know, if that helps you to better understand that concept of inframing or gestell. I would be glad to expand on that more. So inframing, of course, is the dangerous thing. It's supremely dangerous because it prevents other ways of revealing truths about things. But truth in general is dangerous because whenever we're revealing one thing, we're always covering up something else. So now let's talk about the positive side. How do we avoid inframing? Because we're never going to completely avoid the danger of revealing truths. Revealing truths is always dangerous. But how can we reveal truths in a way that we still allow things to be what they are? And to answer this question, I'm going to come back to She's question here. A lot of good questions here. Can you elaborate the notion of distance and nearness from Heidegger's perspective? What does it mean when he says that true nearness requires distance, that true nearness and true distance are one and the same? Okay. In the late Heidegger, one of the main values on the positive side of things is letting things be. This is also a Taoist concept. This comes from the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which literally means acting without acting, or acting through non-action, or acting without intent. So letting things be is about giving them space or creating space for things. If you are letting things be as they are, you can still reveal truths about that thing. And whenever you reveal truths about that thing, what's important is, I guess, two things. First of all, that you are humble about the truth that you are revealing, that you understand that whatever truth you are revealing about a thing is limited, that you're not seeing the whole picture, that the thing itself is manifold and multifaceted, and you're never going to completely understand that thing for its own sake as it is in itself. So the first part is humility, but the second part is more practical. The second part is about making sure that the ways that you are revealing truths are not preventing future modes of revealing. Okay, so going back to the mountain. Right? Somebody might set up a ski resort on top of a mountain. And in a certain sense, this will prevent certain modes of revealing for that mountain, right? Like if you set up a ski resort, that's probably going to interrupt the natural habitat. And that mountain, for its own sake, was not just a geographical feature that looks pretty that people can go skiing on, but this was also a natural habitat for any number of different species and forms of life. So even the ski resort is going to prevent that mountain from being what it is, or Heidegger's classic example, a hydroelectric dam. Now, what are modes of revealing that aren't going to prevent something from being what it is for its own sake? Well, if I photograph the mountain, if I write a poem about the mountain, if I paint the mountain, I'm revealing truths about that mountain, right? I'm revealing that mountain as an inspiration for a work of art. But art is one form of revealing that does not prevent things from being itself. And because art hinges on creative expression, art actually increases the kinds of meanings that can be revealed about an entity. So there's a line from a Hölderlin poem that Heidegger then recreates in his essay, The Question Concerning Technology, where he says, "Where the danger lies, there lies the escape," or there lies the rescue as well. So art is one way of revealing truth about things. But when we express ourselves creatively in an artistic medium, we're not preventing things from being as they are. Right? So it's very different to take a photograph or to paint a picture of a mountain than it is to blow up the mountain to get at the iron ore, or even putting a ski resort on top of a mountain, right? These are things that are going to prevent that mountain from being itself for its own sake, in a way that me taking a picture or me writing a poem about it is not going to prevent various different truths about that mountain from being revealed, right? My painting and my art may reveal the mountain as something that is a challenge to be overcome. Somebody else may reveal it in a poem or a painting as something intimidating and scary. Still others might see it as a manifestation of the sublime aesthetic in terms of Kantian aesthetics. So art multiplies possibilities for how we can understand the meanings of things. Certain modes of revealing, however, not only prevent other modes of revealing, but specifically they prevent things from being themselves. And that's that inframing, which is about limiting something or preventing it from being itself. So I'm also now going to tie this back to, there have been some questions about Zen, because I have in the slides, I've been connecting this concept of space or emptiness with what Heidegger would call true distance. Okay, but first I'll say something about true nearness being the same thing as true distance. If I'm letting things be, lass es sein, that's auf Deutsch, or in the Chinese, wu wei, right? I'm not acting, I'm restraining myself, I'm just letting things be. That's when I'm actually going to have a better chance of seeing something as it is for its own sake, right? If I'm just projecting all of my own concerns and interests and projects onto a thing, then yes, I can reveal truth about that thing, but it's always going to be truth about that thing, probably either in a present at hand or in a ready at hand way, right? Like if I want to use something as a tool, then it's ready at hand. It's just part of my project. I'm using it for my goals, but I'm not really letting that thing be what it is for its own sake, right? Like even thinking about stone tools, right? Now, so what does it mean to say that true nearness and true distance are one and the same? So if I'm letting something be, if I'm giving it space, that's what we would call true distance, because I am recognizing that I'm never going to understand that thing completely. I'm never going to understand every facet of that thing. And having that kind of humility, and then also avoiding modes of revealing that are going to prevent that thing from being itself, that's what's going to allow me to actually have a better, more manifold and more multifaceted understanding of that thing for its own sake. So you might think about this even in terms of your personal relationships, right? Like you might have a friend who's really good helping you with homework. But if that's the only way that you're really thinking about that friend is you want to use them as a means to your own goals and projects, then you're not really seeing that person for their own sake and who they are in themselves. What you want to do if you want to be truly near someone or something is you have to have that humility. You need to know that you're never really going to know what that thing or what that person is in its entirety, but then you also need to avoid revealing truths about that person or that thing in a way that's going to prevent them from being themselves. So true nearness here would be something like intimacy, if we're talking interpersonally. Or when we're talking about things, true nearness means that you actually have a closer understanding of something, right? That you are closer to truly understanding that thing in a multifaceted and a manifold way. So now I'll say something about, there have been some questions about Zen, but please drop me comments. Let me know if I have answered your questions sufficiently. If I haven't, I would be glad to revisit or re-explain something or use different language or use different examples. Okay. So thinking about true nearness being the same as true distance, right? If we're really going to know something in a manifold and a multifaceted way, we need to have humility, but we also need to reveal truths about it such that we're not going to prevent that thing from being itself. So how do you think about this in relation to Zen's idea that everything exists as one, and what we considered two opposites are actually two sides of the same coin? Yeah, so what Shunryu Suzuki talks about as space or emptiness is what allows us to be boundless insofar as we can have this universal loving kindness and compassion towards the entire universe, including ourselves. So you probably notice when he's describing the lotus position and the posture that you're supposed to have during Zazen meditation, he talks about how your left and your right leg are overlapped so that they're not one, but they're not two. And he also says this about mind and body. It's not mind and body, it's mind body. So a lot of what Zen Buddhism is about, and again, this goes back to the influences of Taoist thought, are overcoming traditional binaries or dichotomies. So, which according to Lao Tzu, binaries and dichotomies, oppositional concepts, are just how we distinguish things from one another, right? There is no ugliness until we name what beauty is. There's no yin without yang. There's no tall without short. All right, opposition and difference is how we distinguish things. And this is especially what Western philosophy is concerned with, is about having these distinctions and being able to distinguish things from each other. Okay. However, that's not really the nature of the universe, right? The Tao encompasses all of this, all of these oppositional concepts, and all of these differences are contained within the Tao. So we see a similar sort of worldview in Zazen Buddhist thought, right? Everything is part of this connected whole, and we are at once both separate from it, but at the same time completely interdependent within it. So there's this duality, but there's not, which sounds like a contradictory way of thinking, which goes back to this idea that a lot of Buddhist and Taoist thought is about overcoming these binaries or getting over these binaries. Binaries are useful, but binaries don't necessarily represent the way things are. So yes, you are completely interdependent on the universe, and yet you are completely separate, right? You are completely near the universe. You have this capacity to be boundless and limitless insofar as your love and compassion for the universe extends out ad infinitum. But you also have your own unique point of view. You are one and you are all, right? You are separate, but you are also near. So thinking about everything exists as one. What we may have considered to be opposites are actually two sides of the same coin, right? Near and far, short and tall, beautiful and ugly. These concepts can only make sense because of the contrast. But it is because there is a contrast that either one of these concepts can exist. So we might think of short and tall as being opposite concepts, but really they're just two sides of the same coin, right? We couldn't have one without the other. Whatever concept we have is going to be defined by certain conditions that are going to limit our definition of that thing. But that limit or that definition of that thing is also what allows it to be what it is. So limits here are both a positive and a negative thing, right? If something is tall, right, we're going to put a limit on what defines something as tall, but that does in turn also define what's not tall or what's short. So, yeah, we might think of things as opposites or contradictions, but in the Eastern mind, there are no contradictions, right? So, you are mind and body. You're not mind and body, you're mind body. You're both, but you're neither, right? Same thing with how you are related to the universe. You are separate from the universe, but you are also entirely interdependent with the universe. So, um, I hope that helps. Yeah, so she following up, thinking about that true distance in interpersonal sense. So, for example, with a friend, does true distance mean keeping a distance from that person for them to be themselves? We respect their boundaries, not dependent on them. Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, right? If somebody has borderline personality disorder, for example, or even if somebody is just projecting their own psychological identity onto another person, you're not really respecting that person's boundaries. You're not really seeing them for their own sake. So, yeah, being truly intimate with another person means keeping a distance in terms of having what we would call healthy boundaries, right? Not just projecting your desires onto that person and not being incapable of the thing with borderline personality disorder is that a person is really not able to have healthy boundaries, right? They always take it personally whenever there's an interaction with another person, for better or for worse, so that the other person and who they are is always something that I take personally, right? Like, you might have different opinions than a lot of your friends about a lot of things, but hopefully you don't really take that personally, right? Because who they are, what they think, what they believe, right? That technically has nothing to do with you. So yeah, I think talking about it in terms of respecting their boundaries and not being entirely dependent on them, I think that's a really great way of framing this idea of true distance being a condition for real intimacy or true nearness. Okay, I see one more question about these concepts of presence at hand and readiness to hand. So I'll get to this question, but yeah, please follow up if you have any follow-up questions, or I see we have one other participant here. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat here, which I think is on this side for y'all. But here's the question I'm going to look at now. In your unboxing video, you explain that according to Heidegger, technology does not allow things to be themselves. We think of things as either present at hand or ready to hand. What then is the right way of thinking about things? Should we see them as simultaneously present at hand and ready to hand? What does it mean to see the thing's totality of being? Well, truth is always dangerous. We're never going to have a complete picture, right? That might be an ideal, that might be a goal to strive for, is to see things truly as they are for their own sake, but we're never really going to be able to see the complete picture. So in short, we're never going to see a thing in its totality. But how can we avoid that technological way of thinking? So I'll go back to something I said earlier. This goes back to this idea of giving things space. Lass es sein, let it be, wu wei, don't act, restrain yourself, right? Now, just because we are the kinds of beings that have concern, we have care, we have projects, we're never going to be able to completely avoid that, right? We're always projecting our meanings, our goals, and our concerns onto things. But this goes back to the humility. Understand that you're never going to get a complete picture, and that whatever understanding you have of other things is going to be limited. And then also being careful, right? Reveal truths about things in a way that allow them to be what they are for their own sake, right? And one of the best ways to do this is to focus on artistic or poetic expressions. So creative expressions of feeling and creative expression of your own perspective, your own experience, without necessarily thinking that the meanings that you uncover about other things are actually revealing those things for their own sake. Unfortunately, you're never going to understand things for their own sake. And that even goes for other people. And that might sound kind of depressing. You're never going to really know another person. But I think that that's actually an ethical value that we should hold as a positive ideal. You shouldn't expect that you're going to know something completely. And it's the expectation that you have complete understanding of something that brings with it that danger of enframing and gestell. So, yeah, the goal is not to see things as simultaneously present at hand or ready to hand. Actually, the goal is to try to avoid either of those. Right? In either case, if it's present at hand or ready to hand, we think we have complete understanding of that thing. When it's present at hand, it's in terms of a theoretical understanding. When it's in terms of readiness to hand or readiness at hand, we don't have an abstract theoretical understanding, but we're taking for granted that we know what that thing is and for what purpose it should be used. So to avoid enframing, you actually want to avoid both presence at hand and readiness to hand. Or if you are thinking about things either in terms of abstract theoretical knowledge, presence at hand, or if you're just in action, taking for granted the meaning of a thing, readiness to hand, the goal is to understand and use things in a way that at the end of the day, they can still just be what they are for their own sake, right? So, like a stone tool, right? If I just use a stone tool to like smash nuts, well, that stone is still going to be a stone. However, if I carve into the stone to create a piece of jewelry, well, that stone's never really going to be itself, right? Like I can throw the piece of jewelry back out into nature, but it's not going to be the same thing. It's not going to sort of degrade and contribute the same kinds of minerals and substances to the environment. A couple of follow-up questions. Enframing is revealing truths about something only in terms of human life and values. We don't think about them, mountains, for examples, only as tools for our own purpose. I think these are two separate questions. So, yes, enframing is a way of revealing truths about something only in terms of our life and our values. Specifically, when we enframe something, we reveal it as standing reserve, where standing reserve is something that we see as just a resource to be used for our purposes. I also like to use the language of commodification. You're thinking about something merely as a commodity that can be used or bought or sold in an economic market of exchange. So yeah, enframing is when you're only thinking about something in terms of how it's going to help human projects, specifically within the context of economic exchange. Yeah, and we don't think about mountains, for example, only as tools for our purpose. Yeah, right. If you want to avoid enframing, you need to be thinking about that mountain as having meaning and purpose that goes outside of what value it has in an economic market of exchange. Yeah, so you might do that even by thinking about it in broader ecological terms. You might think about all the various species. You might think about the land itself as a community, which includes not only the living species, but also the abiotic elements like soil, like the sun, right? So thinking about it from a non-anthropocentric point of view is definitely part of that way of thinking that can help you prevent enframing. So, yeah. Oh, good question. Love this question. If we restrain from changing nature for fear of enframing it, then it seems we won't ever get advanced technology. It will be a loss for us humans. Um, Yeah, I think there's an implicit assumption about what advanced technology looks like. So I assume that when you're talking about advanced technology, you're probably talking about things like computers, microchips, advanced AI, and robots. Yeah, certainly we're not going to have any of that unless we're using nature as a means to an end, right? There's a lot of rare minerals, there's a lot of rare ores that are necessary in order to construct components for things like microchips, computers, right? Like your cell phone, right? Like we wouldn't have cell phones if we didn't use nature as a means to an end. Usually when we talk about technology in this class, we will be talking about sort of machines, including robots and computers. However, technology also has a broader meaning. That word technology is just coming from the Greek word techne, which is also the origin of our words for technique. Right. So we might think about technology even just as it applies to agriculture, right? You might think of advanced technology as being mono agriculture, right? Where we have genetic modification of organisms, we have automation of labor by using various machines to till the soil, plant things, or even sow the crops. So these might seem like advanced forms of technology, but really a question of whether or not it's more or less advanced goes back to what are our goals? What are our purposes? What is the meaning of our life? So these days, you see a lot of people actually going back to more old school, traditional methods of agriculture. Why? Well, instead of genetically modifying organisms so that you can grow a tomato in salty soil, or so that that tomato can survive for a long car ride, or I guess it would be more like a trip in the back of a truck or something like that. Um, right? We're avoiding advanced forms of technology there if we're not using genetic modification, or we're not using machines, we're not using fertilizers. But if the goal or the aim is to actually allow the planet to be as it is, to allow a landscape to be what it is as much as possible, well, then, yeah, like if we look at more traditional, more old school farming techniques, which actually Heidegger praises, right? Um, that's what's actually going to allow things to be in themselves. So, what we might think of as rudimentary forms of agriculture, we could definitely think of those as advanced forms of technology, insofar as they allow the land to be what it is for its own sake, as much as is possible. Now, anytime that you are planting things in the ground, anytime you are cultivating plants, yeah, you are changing the landscape. You are preventing that landscape from being what it is. So even if we want to open up our conception of advanced technology such that we might look at more primitive or more rudimentary forms of technology as being advanced in some ways, there is still that trade-off, though, right? It seems like any form of technology is always going to prevent things from being what they are for their own sake. And that is the supreme danger, right? Now, the supreme danger is also tied up with this attitude that says everything is merely a resource to be used for our purposes. So even if we are going to be inframing or limiting things, we might try to limit our acts of inframing, right? So we might make space for things like agricultural technologies. Maybe we think that telecommunications are important, especially in the time of a pandemic like this. So maybe we do want to use ores and minerals and noble metals to make our communications technology. But the question is, how far, right? Where do we put that limit? When do we say enough is enough? Here's something that is not merely in existence for our resources. There needs to be a boundary, right? We can't say that everything is just a means to an end. Otherwise, everything is just a means to an end, including ourselves. And that's when we prevent people from even being able to conceive of the meaning of their own life in a unique and independent way. So yeah, I think you're definitely right. If we're thinking about advanced technology in terms of like computers and telecommunications, we're not going to get that without inframing. Or even if we're broadening our conception of technology to include things that are more primitive, right? I've heard people say that, oh, there was like no agriculture here in these lands that we now call the United States until Europeans came over. That was definitely what Europeans thought. They got here and they didn't recognize any sort of agriculture because it didn't look like what they thought of as agricultural technologies. But certainly the people here had technologies, they had techniques, they had methods for cultivating plants so that they could live off of the land. Yeah, Violet. Yeah, if we recycled more, we would definitely need fewer resources. taken directly from the earth. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's not just about recycling, it's also about more efficient use of the resources that we already have. But then also, so I grew up with the reduce, reuse, recycle. So yeah, recycling things, reusing things, and also reducing consumption and making consumption more efficient. And yeah, you're totally right, Violet, right? The wheel, we might still say that the wheel is still the epitome of advanced technology, right? When we're judging technology as being more or less advanced, there's always an implicit metric or measure there, right? So what do we count as advanced technology? Yeah, certainly my cell phone is a form of advanced technology if we're talking about how easy it is for me to communicate with somebody, or how easy it is for me to pull up a YouTube video and share it with my friends. But if we use a different kind of metric for what counts as advanced, then yeah, these more rudimentary or primitive forms of technology might actually seem much more advanced than the ones that we're used to thinking of as being advanced. So yeah, good questions, good comments. We've been going for over half an hour here. I feel like I've gotten a lot of good questions. Please, anybody, if you're ever confused by anything that I say, or if you ever want me to explain something further, please just drop it in the chat there. Okay, yeah, this is a great question. So thinking about energy and technology and in framing. She asked here, if we use renewable energy, sun, wind, etc., for our machines, is this inframing actually a good thing? Because we can limit our inframing of other kinds of energy. Yeah, I think this is a great question. So oil is the kind of thing that if we're going to use it as a means to an end, we are necessarily inframing it, right? We take that crude oil out, we refine it, we turn it into a product that can be purchased on the market, and then we can switch it about ever anew. And when we do this, that crude oil is never going to be crude oil ever again. However, I'm going to start with sunlight, and then I'm going to move on to wind, because I think that the wind discussion might be a little trickier. But let's say we get our energy instead of from petroleum products, we get it from sunlight, right? We get solar energy. Does that prevent the sun from being what it is for its own sake, right? If we harvest the energy of the sun using solar panels, no, right? The sun is still able to be what it is. Now, of course, it's not quite that simple, because what about the things that were used to make the solar panels, right? There's a lot of industrial manufacturing that goes into making a solar panel, and there's a lot of limited resources that go into the construction of a solar panel. So solar energy definitely allows the sun to be what it is for its own sake, in a way that petroleum-based energy production does not allow crude oil to be what it is for its own sake. But in either case, we still need machines in order to convert that raw product into energy. So there is still going to be some inframing going on. And I think the case might be a little bit trickier even when we're talking about wind. But on the surface, at least, right? Like, yeah, you put up a wind farm, right? We got a bunch in the Midwest here, right? You put up a wind farm, you're not stopping the wind, right? You're harnessing the wind's power and you're converting that into energy, but you're not really stopping the wind. Now, one of the concerns about these large wind farms is birds getting caught up. So if we're thinking about the wind, not just as energy that can be harnessed for the purpose of our own energy consumption, but if we think about the wind as something that contributes to a global climate that is a home for a variety of different species, then yeah, harnessing the wind kind of does prevent it from being what it is for its own sake. Insofar as it might interrupt the capacity that different species have for traveling on the wind or sort of flying through the air. But definitely there's sort of less danger because fewer things are being inframed through solar energy or via wind energy, for example. Like you could always turn off the solar, well, I guess, right, that solar panel, once you've made it, those things are never going to be what they were for their own sake. Same thing with whatever you use to make your wind turbine. But if you turn off the wind turbine, the wind will resume. It's going to be itself. Or if you turn off the solar panel, even if you turn on the solar panel, the sun is still going to be what it is for its own sake. So it seems that different forms of energy production have a higher rate of inframing. So is this a good thing? Well, from the existentialist point of view, we're not really concerned with good, bad, right, or wrong, but it does seem less dangerous, at least, when we are in framing fewer entities. That means that there is less danger, we might say. Now, revealing truth is always dangerous, so we can never completely avoid the danger. But yeah, the goal is to minimize the danger. But it does seem as if even renewable energy is still going to have this inframing effect. But I think you're right that from an ethical point of view, we might count that as a good thing, because that means that there's less inframing in general. So yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's a fair point. If there are any other questions, now is a great time to drop them. I hope I've answered all of your questions sufficiently. Please put me to task if I haven't. Send me a comment, or you can always send me a follow-up email. I'm always glad to explain things in other terms or to use other examples. I like a lot of the examples that are coming through in the chat here today. These have been really good questions. And if there are no more questions, we'll probably wrap it up here pretty quick. I'm going to wait a couple more minutes. I don't want to rush anybody. Yeah. Yes, we can talk about contact high. I hope this wasn't too hard to read in the current conditions. Are you okay? Yeah, we'll talk about contact high. Violet, are you trolling me? Is that serious? Can you re-explain everything you have said in the last half hour? I mean, okay. Yeah, okay, you're just trolling me. Okay. All right. I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah. Thanks for clarifying, Violet. But yeah, she's asking, can we talk about contact high? What about the multicolors in the last panel? Is it a representation of the oneness of the universe? I hadn't thought about it in those terms. But I think that might be a really great way of thinking about it, right? We see very limited color on most of the panels. It's not until we get to those final few panels that we actually get the full spectrum of all the colors. We get the full rainbow. So I think that's a great way of thinking about it, right? Now what we're seeing is interpersonal connection, right? We're seeing two people finally come in contact with each other. Like I said, this is also the first frame where we actually see two complete bodies sharing a panel in the entire graphic novel. So it is this moment of unity, not just in this interpersonal sense between Apex and Ziggurat, but I think this is also this reminder of a much broader sort of universal connectedness. And it's not just the colors, but it's also those shapes there, right? We get this very geometric pattern. In the first multicolor panel, there are these shapes that are radiating out from them. So I think it's this idea that they are connected to each other, but also to the universe, right? So I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. We might also think about color here as representing certain emotions and certain passions. For the vast majority of the graphic novel, the only colors we really see are kind of like light and dark, so like white, gray, black, brown, and then we see a little bit of like pale green. Otherwise, we see flashes of red. Usually when we see these flashes of red, it's because Ziggurat's fighting. So initially, I thought maybe the red is supposed to represent some sort of violence, but then a student suggested that it's not necessarily violence, but maybe passion, right? Because he is being violent, but he's using his violence to save somebody that he loves. And it seems by the time we get to the end of the graphic novel that he also has this larger liberation goal, right? He wants to free people in general. So I think this color can also represent this sort of variety of emotions that cover the human experience. So yeah, I think right? We see the full rainbow, we see the full spectrum, right? So we are seeing these two people united in an interpersonal way, but also reminding us of the interconnectedness of humanity, which is really what that doctor, that expert, is against, right? He's against feeling in general. He wants to make it so that nobody feels anything. So these colors are representative of the broad spectrum of human experience and emotion. So, yeah, I think we can also talk about colors in other ways, but from what I see, I think that's the most important way to understand that. Yeah, the comic is interesting and relatable in this time and place. Yeah, I've taught this before, but it never seemed quite so relevant. This idea that nobody can touch each other, right? They call it a life suit, right? You don't want to put any skin in the game. You want to protect yourself by cutting yourself off from human contact. So I think for a lot of us right now, especially those of us who are cut off from family, friend, maybe living alone, or just not being able to be in contact with your loved ones as much, I think it's really, really relatable in a really sad way. But I also hope that it can help students to sort of process some of the things that are going on as well. So I was a little hesitant to assign this because I thought it might be a little too relatable in this time. But I actually hope that it gives students an opportunity to sort of confront some of these things that we're dealing with collectively as a planet, right? In a certain sense, yeah, we're all, yeah, like I'm hesitant to say we're all in this together because not everybody is experiencing things the same, right? Like it's one storm, but not everybody's experiencing it in the same way, right? Yeah, immunocompromised individuals, absolutely. Yeah, people who are members of vulnerable populations, people with compromised immune systems because of pre-existing health conditions. Yeah, it's definitely a time when we're thinking about human contact a lot differently now. Yeah, here's she's other question. Does the scientist represent the expert's mind? He prides himself on his expertise. He thinks only he knows how things really are. Absolutely, she. Yeah, that's why I paired this with, well, we had the Heidegger earlier this week, and then pairing contact high with the Shunryu Suzuki, right? This contrast between the beginner's mind and the expert's mind. In the beginner's mind, there's openness, which means that there's this capacity for boundless love and compassion for the entire universe, but there's also openness to new possibilities, whereas in the expert's mind, there are very few possibilities, right? That doctor, Dr. Pound, I think is the character's name. That doctor definitely thinks that he has special insight into the nature of our human existence. And he is definitely revealing truths about humans, right? Namely that we don't technically need to touch each other to live, and that touching each other is a way that diseases are spread. But yeah, he's definitely revealing truths such that people are no longer able to be themselves. They're no longer able to reveal themselves for their own sake. So yeah, I think that scientist definitely represents that expert's mind, right? He has an expert understanding of a situation according to his own goals and his own projects. But that's definitely an example of enframing as well. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right, yeah, that scientist thinks he's the only one who knows how things really are. And in a lot of ways, scientists do know things that the general population does not have. That's why we have to put so much trust in our scientists, especially at a time like right now. But I think contact high shows us the darker side of those things, right? And we can also think of a number of historic examples where scientists have inframed people and prevented people from being themselves for their own sake in the name of science or in the name of advancing science or technology. Yeah. Oh, great point. Yeah. So this seems counterintuitive. I take it this being the idea that we shouldn't touch each other, that it's healthier not to touch each other. That seems counterintuitive since we tend to think of humans as social animals. Absolutely. Yes. Scientifically, biologically speaking, we are social creatures. We are social learners, and we rely a lot on our social communities for stability, right? Like human babies are very fragile for several years. It takes a long time until a human offspring can take care of itself. So we really are social animals. Um, so I guess this Dr. Pound, it's not that he wants there to be a lack of social contact, but he wants there to be no feeling, right? That's what he's really trying to prevent, is from people feeling things. So even then, that seems counterintuitive, because if you've looked at the literature from developmental psychology, right, touch deprivation is a condition, a psychological problem that people have when they haven't been exposed to physical contact with other humans in their early years. Um, so yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, if you look at what anthropologists, sociobiologists, and psychologists have to say about it, we are social animals. We need not only social community and interaction, but we also really do benefit in terms of our physical health. We benefit not just psychologically, but physically. We benefit from having human contact with others. But we can definitely see a lot of scientific progress as being an attempt to overcome our nature, right? Like, how many scientists have wanted to overcome mortality, right? Like, we are mortal beings, right? That is the nature of our species. We are mortal. And yet there are a number of people who would love to overcome that fact about our nature. So in many ways, scientists oftentimes conceive of their projects as an attempt to overcome or combat our underlying nature. So, yeah, does that seem counterintuitive? Absolutely. Yeah, which is why, going back to this idea of what do we count as advanced technology, right? We might not think of primitive or rudimentary farming as advanced technology, but if the positive value is to live in harmony or in community with the landscape and all the other species that live on this landscape, then yeah, those primitive farming techniques are definitely a lot more advanced by that metric. We're mortal? Yeah, sorry. It might not feel like it at your age, but I imagine we are all far too reminded of mortality these days. Um, but of course, yeah, it also depends on who you ask, right? Like, yes, we're mortal, but we are also infinite. We are made of stardust, right? We have this capacity to be at one with the universe, which is what a lot of Buddhist thought is about overcoming our small mortal self and identity, and rather connecting with not just other people, but with the universe as a whole. So in that sense, like, you are eternal, right? Conservation of energy never goes away. It's just transformed into something else. So whatever energy it is that makes up who you are, that energy is eternal and infinite. And that's more of a scientific way of thinking about this, but I think that really overlaps with this Buddhist conception that, like, yes, we are all interdependent. We're separate, but we're interdependent. So it's not one or the other. It's both at the same time, but neither, right? So yes, we are mortal, but we are also infinite. Yeah, I guess the deprivation of touch, something we know is important to us, is what makes this comics world a dystopia. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to post a comment about what you all think dementia is, or skin sanity. This is the condition that Dr. Pound is trying to treat by way of these life suits. So yeah, we can talk about the different things that this dementia represents, right? So we have a couple different clues. We have that support group at the very beginning of the graphic novel, where we have different characters sort of sharing what got them put into this treatment center and how they were violating the rules of society. Um, so yeah, what sort of skin to skin contact, what sort of interpersonal human touch do we see as healthy and normal, and what kind of human touch gets demonized or even pathologized. So I'll just put that out there. All right, we are coming up on an hour. So I think I will close us up at 11 o'clock. So this is your last chance to ask questions. I've really enjoyed the questions today. I hope that it's been helpful to you all. Even if you're watching this on the catch up afterwards, I hope that this has been a good resource for you. If you are not able to make it to the live streams live, you can always send me an email ahead of time, and then I will answer your question during the live stream. But yeah, this is really supposed to be an opportunity for students who want that real-time interaction. Yeah, good point, She. Ironically, many philosophers perceive passions or the emotions as instinctive and primitive. They put too much emphasis on the role of rationality. Yeah, wholeheartedly agree, especially here in the West. Hume is an exception to that rule. Hume would say that logic is motivated by passions. So most Western philosophers, they think of rationality as somehow being more advanced than feeling and thinking. But actually, even psychologically, if you look at some of the studies done on the relationship between rationality and emotion, rationality is not evolved beyond emotion. Rationality is influenced and dependent upon emotion. And I guess it's really recently that now, at least in this culture, in American English language culture, that we talk about emotional intelligence, which is a very important form of intelligence, right? Yeah, it's too bad that in the West, in Western philosophy, there's been so little importance put on emotions, because that's part of our physical and our mental health. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, She. Um, I might make a recommendation here. Um, if you're curious about human social nature, if you're interested in social learning, if you're interested in ideas about what counts as intelligence that are broader than just thinking of intelligence as mathematical, scientific, rational calculation, um, I would recommend Franz de Waal's Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? Franz de Waal is a primatologist. He studies primarily chimpanzees, but also baboons and bonobos to a more limited extent. But in that book, Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? He's really trying to blow up this concept of intelligence and what we count as intelligence. So that even if an animal isn't capable of counting or doing the same kinds of rational thought as us, there's still some form of intelligence, because intelligence is just what allows you to navigate your life and navigate the world. So I'll just throw that out there as a general recommendation. Oh, thanks. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I'm glad you found this to be insightful and fun. I enjoy these live streams, and I hope you do too. Oh, great. Yeah, please do check that out. We are coming up on the 11 o'clock hour. So if there are no further questions, I think I'm going to call it done. And thanks for the great questions. I'm really glad that I was able to dig into some of these ideas. And I'm really glad we even got to talk about contact high. So I hope everybody is safe and healthy. I hope your loved ones are too. And I will be back this afternoon for the afternoon live stream. Otherwise, have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.